The dust storm on Terminus 7 had been raging for 3 days when Dr. Keth Morven made the discovery that would change everything. He crawled through the narrow tunnel his team had dug into the ancient ruins, his breathing mask fogging up in the cold air. The planet had been dead for thousands of years, but something about these structures felt different from the usual archaeological sites he explored. Keth was an Altarian, tall and thin with 4 arms that made him perfect for delicate excavation. Work. He had spent most of his life digging through the remains of dead civilizations, but this place made his skin crawl. The walls were covered in symbols from at least 12 different languages, most of them extinct. That alone was strange enough. But what really bothered him was how the symbols seemed to tell the same story over and over again. They all mentioned something called human. His assistant, a young Corvani named Pip, was working deeper in the ruins when she called out, "Dr. Morven, you need to see this." Her voice echoed through the stone corridors, urgent and excited. Keth hurried toward her voice. His boots clicking on the ancient floor, Pip was standing in front of a massive wall covered in fresh inscriptions. Not fresh as in recently made, but fresh as in recently uncovered. The writing was clear and deep, carved with precision into the black stone. Keth ran his fingers over the symbols, feeling the smooth edges that had been protected from erosion for millennia. "Can you read any of it?" Pip asked, her large eyes reflecting the light from their portable lamps. Keth studied the wall carefully. The symbols were from the old Xanthari Empire, a civilization that had ruled half the galaxy before mysteriously vanishing 10,000 years ago. He had learned their language during his studies, though few others bothered with such ancient tongues. "It talks about a weapon," he said slowly, translating as he read. "Something that ended wars not by destroying enemies, but by making them surrender willingly. They called it the ultimate weapon of the old empire." Pip moved closer, her breath visible in the cold air. "What kind of weapon does that?" Keth continued reading, his voice growing more concerned with each word. "They say it was not a ship or a device. It was something called human, according to this. Entire star systems would surrender when they heard that human was coming. Not because they were afraid of being destroyed, but because they wanted to join whatever side human was on." The implications were staggering. Keth had studied the Xanthari Empire for decades. They had been the most powerful civilization in recorded history, controlling thousands of worlds across hundreds of star systems. If they had possessed a weapon that could make enemies want to join them, it would explain how they had expanded so quickly and why their collapse had been so complete. "There's more," Keth said, moving to another section of the wall. "It says human was not just one weapon, but many. Each one was different, but they all shared the same power. They could understand any enemy, find any weakness, and turn any situation to their advantage." Pip shivered, and not just from the cold. "That sounds terrifying," Keth nodded grimly. "The scary part is that, according to this, human never actually killed anyone. The weapon somehow convinced enemies that they were fighting for the wrong side. Entire fleets would switch sides mid-battle. Whole planets would declare allegiance to the Empire without a single shot being fired. They worked through the night, carefully documenting every symbol and inscription. By morning, they had uncovered enough evidence to confirm what Keth had suspected. The weapon called human had been real, and it had been the key to the Xanthari Empire's dominance. 3 days later, their emergency transmission reached the Galactic Council on the capital world of Prima. The message was brief, but urgent, ancient. Superweapon discovered, immediate investigation required, galaxy-level threat implications. The council chambers erupted in chaos when the transmission was played. Representatives from dozens of species argued loudly about what should be done. Some demanded that the weapon be destroyed immediately. Others insisted it should be studied. A few suggested that maybe, just maybe, it could be used to solve the galaxy's current crisis. The Void Swarm had been consuming worlds at the edge of the galaxy for months. Nothing seemed able to stop them. Traditional weapons were useless against their strange technology. Ships, stations, and entire colonies simply vanished when the swarm arrived. The council had been growing desperate for any solution. Commander Val Thorne sat quietly in the gallery, watching the debate with growing frustration. She was a career military officer from the Hegemony Fleet, scarred from countless battles and tired of political arguments. Her people were dying while the council talked. Finally, she stood up. With respect, council members, we don't have time for debate. The swarm will reach the inner systems within months. If this weapon exists, we need to find it now. The Altarian representative, a distant cousin of Dr. Morven, supported her. The archaeological evidence is clear. This weapon ended the greatest empire in history. If we can find it and understand how it works, we might be able to turn it against the swarm. After hours of argument, the council reached a decision. Commander Thorne would lead an expedition to find the weapon called Human. She would have access to the best ships, the finest scientific equipment, and a team of specialists chosen from across the galaxy. Her mission was simple: find the weapon, understand it, and use it to save civilization. Thorne accepted the assignment without hesitation. She had spent her career fighting impossible battles, and this was just another one. As she left the council chambers, she was already planning her next moves. First, she would need a team of experts. Then she would need to follow the trail that Dr. Morven had started. The galaxy was running out of time, and somewhere among the ruins of dead worlds, an ancient weapon waited to be found. Thorne had fought aliens, pirates, and rogue AI systems. Now she would hunt for something that had once brought the mightiest empire in history to its knees. She had no idea what she was really looking for, but she knew one thing for certain. The weapon called Human was their only hope against the Void Swarm. Whatever it took, she would find it and bring it home. Commander Val Thorne stood on the bridge of the research vessel Seeker, watching the stars streak past as they jumped to hyperspace. 3 weeks had passed since the council had given her the mission, and she had assembled what she hoped was the right team for the job. Nix was her chief engineer, a brilliant quantum specialist whose people had mastered energy manipulation centuries ago. He was short and stocky, with 6 arms that moved independently as he worked on complex machinery. His species rarely left their homeworld, but the promise of studying ancient technology had convinced him to join the mission. Dr. Arya Sin was the team's xenolinguist, an expert in dead languages and ancient cultures. She came from a species that communicated through color changes in their skin, which made her naturally gifted at understanding nonverbal communication. Her translator device converted her thoughts into speech, though she often forgot to use it when she got excited. Rex was their combat strategist, a veteran soldier from the Hegemony Fleet who had fought in more battles than he could count. His people were natural warriors, bred for combat and trained from childhood to think tactically. He was the largest member of the team, with thick, armor-like skin and reflexes that could track a bullet in flight. Their first stop was the Archive, World of Memory, where the galaxy's oldest records were stored. Dr. Sin had requested access to the restricted historical databases, hoping to find more information about the weapon called Human. The Archive was a massive structure that covered half a continent, filled with data crystals and quantum storage devices that contained millions of years of galactic history. The librarian, an ancient being whose species had been keepers of knowledge for millennia, led them through corridors lined with glowing displays. The records from the Xanthari period are incomplete, the librarian explained, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. Much was lost when their empire collapsed. However, we do have fragments from various sources that mention your weapon. Dr. Sin worked for hours, translating ancient texts and cross-referencing different accounts. What she found was disturbing. The weapon called Human appeared in records from dozens of different species, always described in similar terms, but never fully explained. "Listen to this," she said, her skin flickering with excitement. This is from a Valdorian military report, dated about 9,000 years ago. They were fighting against the Xanthari Empire when Human arrived. According to the commander, Human didn't attack their fleet. Instead, it somehow convinced half their ships to join the Empire. The commander wrote that his own officers began arguing that they were fighting for the wrong side. Rex leaned forward, his tactical mind trying to understand the implications. That's impossible. You can't just convince an entire fleet to switch sides in the middle of a battle. But it happened, Dr. Sin continued. Here's another account from the Thorian Republic. They describe human as having an almost supernatural ability to understand alien psychology. It could find weaknesses that the aliens themselves didn't know they had and exploit them not through force, but through persuasion. Nix was studying technical readouts from the same period. The energy signatures are strange, he said, his multiple arms working on different displays simultaneously. Whatever human was, it didn't use conventional weapons. The power readings suggest something that could interface directly with biological systems. Their next destination was the ruins of Covenant Station, an ancient trading post that had been one of the last places to fall to the Xanthari Empire. The station had been abandoned for thousands of years, but its central database might still contain useful information. The station drifted in space like a massive metal skeleton, its hull scarred by centuries of meteor impacts. Thorne's team suited up and made their way through the abandoned corridors. Their helmet lights cutting through the darkness. The central database was located in the station's core, protected by layers of security that had long since failed. Nix connected his equipment to the ancient systems, trying to extract whatever data remained intact. There, he said, pointing to a display that flickered with corrupted information. Something about humans' arrival at the station. Dr. Sin worked to translate the fragmented records. The station commander knew human was coming. He had 3 days to prepare his defenses. But instead of fighting, he ordered all weapons to be powered down. He wrote that resistance was pointless because human would just convince them to surrender anyway. So he gave up without a fight? Rex asked, his warrior instincts offended by such cowardice. Not exactly, Dr. Sin continued reading. He wrote that human didn't demand surrender. Instead, it offered them a choice. They could join the Empire willingly and keep their jobs and their lives, or they could be conquered and lose everything. Most chose to join. The pattern was becoming clear. Wherever human had appeared, the same thing happened. Initial resistance would crumble not through defeat, but through conversion. Enemies became allies, opponents became supporters, and entire civilizations would abandon their old ways to join the Xanthari Empire. Their third stop was the dead world of Nexus, where the largest battle of the Xanthari War had taken place. The planet's surface was still scarred from the conflict, with the remains of massive ships scattered across the landscape like metallic mountains. Among the wreckage, they found something unexpected, a partially intact communications array from one of the defeated fleets. Nix managed to extract the final transmissions from the battle, and Dr. Sin translated them with growing amazement. "This is incredible," she said, her skin cycling through colors that indicated extreme excitement. "The fleet commander is talking to human directly. Not fighting, not negotiating, but having what sounds like a philosophical discussion about the nature of war and peace." The transmission was fragmented, but the meaning was clear. Human had somehow convinced the commander that the war was pointless, that both sides were fighting for the same basic goals: security, prosperity, and survival for their people. By the end of the conversation, the commander had ordered his entire fleet to stand down. "That's not possible," Rex insisted. "You can't just talk an enemy into surrendering. Military commanders are trained to resist psychological warfare." "But it happened," Thorne said grimly. "And if the records are accurate, human did this thousands of times across hundreds of worlds. The question is, what kind of weapon could do that?" As they prepared to leave Nexus, Dr. Sin made one final discovery. Hidden in the wreckage of a command ship, she found a personal log from an officer who had witnessed human's arrival. The entry was brief but chilling. "Human came to us not as a conqueror, but as a teacher. It showed us that we were fighting for the wrong reasons, that our enemies were not so different from us. I understand now why the Empire grows so quickly. It's not because they're stronger than us. It's because they're better than us. And human makes everyone around it better too." The team returned to the Seeker with more questions than answers. They had confirmed that human was real and that it had been instrumental in the Xanthari Empire's expansion. but they still didn't understand what it was or how it worked. As they prepared for their next jump, Thorne gathered her team in the briefing room. Outside the windows, stars wheeled past in the familiar pattern of hyperspace. "We know human exists," she said. "We know it can convert enemies into allies. What we don't know is where to find it or how to use it against the Void Swarm." The hunt was just beginning, and time was running out. The ice world of Haven appeared on the view screen like a white marble floating in the darkness of space. Commander Thorne studied the sensor readings with growing interest. The planet showed no signs of life, but deep beneath its frozen surface, something was generating a faint energy signature. "The signal is coming from about 2 kilometers down," Nix reported, his multiple arms dancing across the sensor controls. "It's definitely artificial, and it's old, very old." Dr. Sin was analyzing the linguistic patterns they had discovered in the ancient records. "The trail leads here," she said, her skin flickering with excitement. 3 different sources mention Haven as the final destination of the Xanthari evacuation fleet. "If humans survive the Empire's collapse, this is where we'll find it." Rex was already planning the descent. "The ice is thick, but we can use thermal charges to create a shaft. The energy signature suggests whatever's down there is still active, so we'll need to be careful." It took them 6 hours to melt through the ice and reach the buried facility. What they found was beyond anything they had expected. The structure was massive, stretching for kilometers in all directions. The walls were made of some unknown material that seemed to absorb light, and the corridors were filled with a strange, breathable atmosphere. "This isn't just a bunker," Thorne said as they explored the facility. "It's a city." "A city built for refugees." The evidence was everywhere. Living quarters designed for dozens of different species, medical facilities equipped to treat alien physiologies, and storage areas that had once held supplies for thousands of inhabitants. But the most shocking discovery was in the facility's central chamber, stasis pods. Hundreds of them, arranged in neat rows like sleeping soldiers. Most were empty, their occupants long since awakened or dead. But a few dozen still hummed with power, their occupants suspended in artificial sleep. "These aren't weapons," Dr. Sin said, her translator crackling with confusion. "They're people, living beings in suspended animation." Nix ran his scanners over the active pods. "The technology is incredible. These beings have been in stasis for almost 10,000 years, and they're still alive. Their life signs are stable. Their brain activity is normal. It's like they're just sleeping." Rex approached one of the pods cautiously, his warrior instincts on high alert. The being inside appeared almost familiar, with 2 arms, 2 legs, and a face that reminded him of several different species he had encountered. But there was something about the proportions that was subtly wrong, as if this creature was somehow the template from which other species had been derived. "The facial structure is similar to Altarians, but the bone density is more like Corvani," Dr. Sin observed. "The muscle mass is comparable to hegemony soldiers, but the neural pathways are more complex than any species I've studied." Thorne found a control panel near the pods and activated the facility's information system. The displays came to life, showing data in the ancient Xanthari language. Dr. Sin worked quickly to translate the records, her skin cycling through colors as she processed the information. "This is impossible," she said finally. "According to these records, the weapon called human wasn't a weapon at all. It was a species. These beings, they called themselves humans, and they were the rulers of the Xanthari Empire." The revelation hit the team like a physical blow. Everything they thought they knew about the ancient empire was wrong. The humans hadn't been created by the Xanthari. They had been the Xanthari. The empire hadn't been built through conquest but through cooperation, with humans somehow able to unite dozens of different species under a single banner. "But how?" Rex asked, his tactical mind struggling to understand. "How does one species convince hundreds of others to join them willingly?" Dr. Sin continued reading the records. "It wasn't force or technology, it was something else. The humans had an unprecedented ability to understand other species, to find common ground where none seemed to exist. They could see potential in aliens that the aliens themselves didn't know they had. The records told a story that was both inspiring and tragic. The humans had spread across the galaxy not as conquerors but as partners. They had approached each new species with curiosity rather than suspicion, offering friendship instead of demanding submission. When conflicts arose, they had found ways to resolve them that left both sides stronger than before. They were diplomats, Thorne realized, the ultimate diplomats. They could make any enemy into an ally, any conflict into cooperation. But the story had a dark ending. A plague had swept through human space, something that affected only their species. Instead of fleeing to safety, the humans had stayed to coordinate the evacuation of their alien partners. They had worked tirelessly to ensure that the other species could survive without them, even as their own civilization crumbled. This facility was their last refuge, Dr. Sin said, her voice heavy with emotion. The final humans sealed themselves in stasis, hoping that someday the galaxy might need them again. They didn't hide because they were afraid. They hid because they knew that without them, the Empire would fall apart. Mix was studying the stasis technology with growing amazement. This is beyond anything we've ever developed. They didn't just preserve their bodies. They preserved their minds, their memories, their personalities. These aren't just survivors. They're the last representatives of the greatest civilization in galactic history. Rex was studying the tactical implications. If these humans are really what the records claim, they could be the key to defeating the Void Swarm, not through weapons or technology, but through their ability to unite the galaxy against a common threat. The question was whether they should wake one of the sleeping humans. The decision wasn't theirs to make alone. Thorne activated her communication array and sent an encrypted message to the Galactic Council, reporting their discovery and requesting instructions. The response came back within hours. Proceed with caution. Authorize limited awakening under controlled conditions. Priority: determine if subjects can be safely revived and if they pose any threat to current galactic stability. The team spent hours debating which pod to open first. The facility's records included basic information about each occupant, but much of it was in technical language that was difficult to translate. Finally, they chose a pod containing someone identified as a crisis coordinator and diplomatic specialist. The awakening process was tense. None of them knew what to expect when they opened the pod. Would the human be hostile? Would it try to re-establish the old empire? Would it even be able to understand them after 10,000 years of sleep? As the pod opened with a soft hiss, the team held their breath. The figure inside was smaller than they had expected, with pale skin and dark hair. Its eyes opened slowly, blinking in the artificial light. When it spoke, its voice was weak but clear. "Is everyone okay?" it asked, struggling to sit up. "Did the evacuation work? Are the others safe?" The first words of the legendary weapon called human were not a demand for information or a threat of conquest. They were a question about the welfare of others. In that moment, the team began to understand what had made the humans so dangerous to their enemies and so beloved by their allies. They weren't weapons of war, they were builders of peace. And after 10,000 years of sleep, they were finally awake. The human sat up slowly in the medical bay, looking around at the faces surrounding him with curious eyes. Commander Thorne had decided to wake the being identified as Marcus Webb, hoping that a diplomatic specialist would be less likely to cause problems than a military leader. Marcus was smaller than most of the team members, with brown hair and green eyes that seemed to take in every detail of his surroundings. He wore the simple clothing that had been provided by the facility's systems, but there was something about his posture that suggested confidence despite his obvious confusion. "My name is Marcus Webb," he said, his voice growing stronger. "I was a coordinator for the Terran Diplomatic Corps. The last thing I remember was entering stasis during the final evacuation. How long have I been asleep?" Dr. Sin's translator worked to convert her response into something Marcus could understand. "You have been in stasis for approximately 10,000 years. Your empire fell shortly after you entered the pods." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing this information. When he opened them again, there was sadness there, but also something else. Determination. 10,000 years, he repeated. Then everyone I knew is gone. The evacuation fleet, the colonies, the partnerships we built. He looked up at the team. But you're here, which means some species survived. Tell me about the current situation. Thorne explained about the Galactic Council, the various species that made up modern civilization, and the threat posed by the Void Swarm. Marcus listened carefully, asking questions that showed he was quickly understanding the political and military realities of their time. The Void Swarm, he said thoughtfully. They consume worlds and ignore all attempts at communication. That suggests they're either unable to communicate or they see no value in doing so. Have you tried to understand what they want? Rex snorted. They want to destroy everything. What's to understand? Marcus looked at the combat specialist with interest. In my experience, nobody destroys things just for the sake of destruction. There's always a reason, even if it's not immediately obvious. The swarm must want something, or they're afraid of something, or they're protecting something. This was not the kind of thinking the team was used to. Military commanders focused on how to defeat enemies, not on why those enemies were fighting in the first place. But Marcus seemed genuinely interested in understanding the swarm's motivations. You said they ignore attempts at communication. Marcus continued. But what kind of communication? Have you tried nonverbal methods, mathematical concepts, emotional appeals? Dr. Sin's skin flickered with excitement. The Council has only tried standard diplomatic protocols. Voice transmissions. Data packets, ceasefire signals. Nothing that would work with a truly alien intelligence. Then that's where we start, Marcus said, standing up carefully. Before we can defeat them, we need to understand them. And before we can understand them, we need to try talking to them properly. Nix was amazed by the human's approach. You've been awake for less than an hour, and you're already thinking about how to communicate with our enemies. Marcus smiled, and the expression transformed his face. That's what humans do. We try to understand others, find common ground, and build relationships. It's not always possible, but it's always worth trying. Over the next few hours, Marcus toured the facility with the team, learning about the technology they had developed and the challenges they faced. His questions were insightful, and his observations were sharp. But what impressed the team most was his genuine interest in their welfare when Nix mentioned that the quantum drive was having efficiency problems. Marcus spent an hour learning about the technology and asking questions that helped the engineer see the problem from a new angle. When Dr. Sin expressed frustration with a particularly difficult translation, Marcus sat with her and offered suggestions based on his experience with alien languages. This is what made humans so dangerous, Rex realized. They make everyone around them better at what they do. Marcus overheard the comment and laughed. Dangerous? Is that what the records say about us? The ancient texts describe humans as the ultimate weapon, Thorne explained. They say you could turn any enemy into an ally, make any species abandon their old ways to join your empire. Marcus looked troubled by this description. We never thought of ourselves as weapons. We were just trying to build something better, something that could work for everyone. The empire wasn't about conquest, it was about cooperation. As the day continued, the team began to see what Marcus meant. When they encountered a problem with the facility's power systems, Marcus didn't try to fix it himself. Instead, he asked questions that helped Nix identify the real issue. When tensions arose between team members over the best way to proceed, Marcus didn't take sides. Instead, he found ways to help them understand each other's perspectives. The most dramatic example came when the team was discussing their next move. Rex wanted to wake all the humans immediately and organize them into a military force. Dr. Sin argued for a more cautious approach, studying each human individually before making decisions. Nix wanted to focus on the technology in the facility. While Thorne was concerned about the political implications of their discovery, the argument grew heated, with each team member convinced that their approach was the only correct one. Marcus listened to all of them, asking questions and making observations that helped clarify each position. Then he made a suggestion that somehow incorporated elements of all their ideas. "We wake 3 more humans," he said. 1 from each specialty area: a scientist, a military coordinator, and a cultural specialist. We study the facility's technology while they're being revived, and we prepare a full report for the council that includes all our findings. That way, we can move forward quickly, while still being careful. The solution was so obviously sensible that the team wondered why they hadn't thought of it themselves. It addressed everyone's concerns while moving the mission forward efficiently. That's how they did it, Thorne realized. They didn't force people to agree with them. They found ways to make everyone feel like they were part of the solution. Marcus was already working on the next phase of their mission. He had asked for access to all available information about the Void Swarm, and he was studying it with the same intensity he had brought to understanding the team's dynamics. The swarms. "Movement patterns are interesting," he said, pointing to a tactical display. "They're not random. There's a logic to their attacks, a pattern that suggests they're looking for something specific." Rex joined him at the display. "We've been trying to figure out that pattern for months. Our best analysts can't make sense of it." "Maybe they're thinking about it wrong," Marcus suggested. "What if the swarm isn't trying to destroy civilization? What if they're trying to save it?" The idea was so radical that it took the team a moment to process it. Save civilization by consuming it? But as Marcus explained his thinking, the concept began to make sense. "Look at the worlds they've attacked," he said. "They're all facing some kind of crisis. Environmental collapse, political instability, resource depletion. What if the swarm sees these problems and thinks the only solution is to absorb the population before they destroy themselves?" It was a theory that would require more investigation, but it opened up possibilities that hadn't existed before. If the swarm could be convinced that the galaxy's species were capable of solving their own problems, maybe they would stop their attacks as the team prepared to wake the next group of humans. Marcus was already planning their approach to the swarm, not as enemies to be defeated, but as misguided protectors who needed to be shown a better way. The weapon called human was finally awake, and it was nothing like what anyone had expected. The alarms began blaring 3 days after Marcus had been awakened. Commander Thorne rushed to the bridge of the Seeker, where her crew was frantically working at their stations. The main view screen showed a sight that made her blood run cold. The distinctive energy signatures of the Void Swarm were approaching the Haven system. "How many ships?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "At least 50 contact signatures," her sensor officer reported. "They'll be here in 6 hours. Thorne's mind raced through their options. The Seeker was a research vessel, not a warship. They had no chance of fighting off a swarm attack. Their only hope was to evacuate the facility and hope they could escape. Before the swarm arrived, Marcus appeared on the bridge, having been summoned by the emergency alert. Behind him were the 3 other humans they had awakened: Dr. Lisa Chun, a scientist who specialized in biology and psychology; Captain David Kim, a military coordinator with experience in crisis management; and Professor Elena Rodriguez, a cultural specialist who had spent her career studying alien civilizations. "What's our situation?" Marcus asked calmly. Thorne explained about the approaching swarm, expecting the humans to share her panic. Instead, Marcus turned to his companions and began discussing their options in low, urgent tones. "We can't evacuate everyone," Dr. Chun said. "The stasis pods are too delicate to move quickly, and we'd need specialized equipment to keep the others alive during transport." Captain Kim was studying the tactical displays. "The swarm ships are moving in their standard formation. They're not trying to hide their approach, which suggests they don't see us as a threat. Or they're so confident in their superiority that they don't care if we see them coming," Rex added grimly. Professor Rodriguez was examining the communication logs. "Have you tried talking to them since they entered the system?" "Standard protocols," Thorne replied. No response as usual. Marcus made a decision that shocked everyone. "We're going to wake the others. All of them." "Are you insane?" Rex demanded. We barely have 6 hours. The revival process takes at least 2 hours per person, and we don't know how they'll react to being awakened into a crisis situation. We don't have a choice, Marcus said firmly. If we're going to survive this, we need every advantage we can get. And right now, our biggest advantage is that we understand cooperation better than anyone else in the galaxy. The next few hours were the most intense of Thorne's career. While the Seeker's crew prepared the ship for possible evacuation, the humans worked with incredible efficiency to revive their sleeping companions. Marcus coordinated the revival process, Dr. Chun monitored the medical systems, Captain Kim organized the awakening teams, and Professor Rodriguez prepared briefing materials for the newly awakened humans. As each human emerged from stasis, they were quickly brought up to speed on the situation. Instead of panic or confusion, they responded with calm professionalism. Engineers immediately began working with Nix to improve the facility's defenses. Diplomats started analyzing the swarms. Communication attempts. Military specialists worked with Rex to develop evacuation plans, but Marcus had a different idea. "We're not going to evacuate," he announced. "We're going to try to communicate with the swarm." The suggestion was met with stunned silence. Even the other humans looked at him with surprise. "Marcus," Dr. Chun said carefully, "the swarm has never responded to communication attempts. They've destroyed every ship that's tried to make contact." "Because nobody's tried to communicate with them properly," Marcus replied. "We've been approaching them like they're just another alien species, but what if they're not? What if they're something completely different?" He turned to Professor Rodriguez. "You've studied the reports. What do you think the swarm really is?" The cultural specialist thought for a moment. "If I had to guess, I'd say they're not invaders in the traditional sense. They're more like gardeners. They see problems in the galaxy and try to fix them by removing what they perceive as threats." "Exactly," Marcus said. "And right now, they probably see us as a threat to be eliminated. But what if we could show them that we're not a threat? What if we could prove that the galaxy species are capable of solving their own problems?" Captain Kim was already working on the logistics. "We'd need to demonstrate cooperation on a scale they've never seen before. Every species in the galaxy, working together toward a common goal." "We don't have every species," Thorne pointed out. "We have one research team and a few dozen humans who've been asleep for 10,000 years. Marcus smiled. "Then we'll have to work with what we have." As the swarm ships entered the system, the humans put their plan into action. Instead of trying to fight or flee, they began broadcasting on every frequency they could access. But they weren't sending standard diplomatic messages. They were sending something unprecedented, a real-time demonstration of cooperation. The broadcast showed humans and aliens working together to solve problems. Nix and a human engineer collaborating. On power systems, Dr. Sin and Professor Rodriguez developing new translation protocols. Rex and Captain Kim planning defense strategies that prioritized civilian safety over military objectives. The message was clear. These species weren't fighting each other. They were helping each other become better than they could be alone. The swarm ships slowed their approach, their energy signatures changing in ways that suggested they were analyzing the transmissions. For the first time in recorded history, the Void Swarm was actually paying attention to something other than their target. Then something unprecedented happened. The swarm ships began broadcasting back. Not with weapons or threats, but with data. Mathematical concepts, scientific principles, and what appeared to be questions about the cooperation they were witnessing. Dr. Chun worked frantically to decode the transmissions while Marcus and Professor Rodriguez developed responses that emphasized the voluntary nature of their cooperation. The conversation that followed was slow and halting, but it was real communication. The swarm, it turned out, were not destroyers. They were protectors, ancient beings who had been watching the galaxy for millions of years. They had seen countless civilizations rise and fall, usually destroying themselves through war, environmental collapse, or resource depletion. Their solution had been to absorb failing civilizations before they could destroy themselves, preserving what they could in their collective consciousness, but they had never encountered a civilization that could actually cooperate across species lines. The idea that different species could work together to solve problems instead of fighting over resources was completely foreign to them. "They're not evil," Marcus explained to the team as the communication continued. "They're just practical. They've seen so many civilizations fail that they assume failure is inevitable. They're trying to save what they can." The conversation with the swarm continued for hours, with humans serving as translators and mediators. Slowly, carefully, they began to convince the ancient beings that this time might be different. The galaxy's species were learning to work together, to solve problems cooperatively, and to build something better than what had come before. The turning point came when the swarm asked for proof that this cooperation could work on a larger scale. Marcus made a proposal that was both simple and revolutionary. Instead of absorbing failing civilizations, the swarm could help them succeed. "You have millions of years of experience," he said. "You've seen every mistake that civilizations can make. Instead of waiting for them to fail, you could help them avoid those mistakes in the first place." The idea was so radical that it took the swarm time to process it. They had been destroyers for so long that they had forgotten they could be builders. But the humans' demonstration of cooperation had shown them a different way. The swarm ships began to withdraw, but not in defeat. They were returning to their collective to share what they had learned and to debate whether this new approach might work. The immediate threat was over, but more importantly, a new possibility had been opened. As the alien ships disappeared into hyperspace, the team gathered in the facility's main chamber. The humans were already making plans for the future, discussing how they could help the galaxy's species work together more effectively. "This is what we do," Marcus explained to Thorn. "We don't conquer or destroy. We help others become the best versions of themselves. We find ways to turn enemies into allies, conflicts into cooperation, and problems into opportunities." The galaxy had been searching for a weapon to save them from the Void Swarm. What they had found was something far more valuable: partners who could help them save themselves. The ancient superweapon called human had finally been awakened, and it was exactly what the galaxy needed: not a weapon of war, but a tool of peace. Not a destroyer of enemies, but a builder of bridges. The humans were home, and they were ready to help the galaxy become something greater than the sum of its parts.